We're live! Alright, so hi everyone! Avery Young here, and welcome back to the Storyteller's Corner, episode 13. And today is gonna be a really good story, and I'm excited for all of you to see it. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. I am just really super excited because we're going to be talking about one of my favorite creatures in the world. Now, I know with this channel I say I like all monsters, and I do. However, everyone's fond of something, and I happen to be very particularly fond of mermaids and merfolk and the like. Now, mermaids are a classic fairy tale creature, usually of the femme fatale variety, though their most recent adaptations and interpretations of the modern era are seen as more innocent and jovial and playful. They weren't always like that. And I'm quite serious about this, as mermaids have been around for centuries in mythology and folklore, with the earliest merfolk being an Assyrian water goddess. Now, the thing with water, and specifically the ocean, is it's been tied with symbolism of rebirth, life, death, and of course, femininity, as it were. Because the ocean can be very bountiful and life-giving. It's full of fish that make for good food, among other things. And it's also has its tempers. A tsunami can wipe out a village, or a storm can capsize an unfortunate boat. The ocean has been very important to humanity ever since the beginning of time, and it shows. Now, mermaids are everywhere. And it's not just in America where mermaids are thought of. No. Mermaids are everywhere. And every country around the world has their own interpretation or flavor of mermaids. For example, you have the African lizard women, and my speakers just decided not to work. There we go. But you have the lizard women of Africa who have lizard-like qualities. And then you also have Hawaiian mermaids. So mermaids are everywhere in mythology and folklore, and their appearances vary depending on what culture you're looking at. Like, for example, the Celtic and Nordic mythology and folklore gave us selkies, which also fall under the animal bride and animal bridegroom trope, which I will dive into more later. But long story short, selkies, like all animal brides and animal bridegrooms, take the form of an animal, in this case a seal, and when they shed their seal skin, they turn into a beautiful young woman or a handsome young man. And it's if the selkie's coat is stolen that they can't return back to the sea. Then the Irish gave us marrows. And one thing I find fascinating about marrows is that they actually show some sexual dimorphism, which is a difference between the males and the females of a species. In the case of marrows, appearance is one of the vast differences. For example, female marrows are described as being very beautiful, very fair skin, dark hair, webbed fingers, and of course they have a stylish red cap on. This red cap is magic, and it allows the wearer to breathe underwater, or in the case of the marrow, breathe on land, since marrows are aquatic by nature, and aquatic things tend to be unable to breathe underwater. Oh, hi, Andrea Gibson. Hello, welcome. I'm just getting into the commentary bit of the story before I actually read our story for today, though I'm really excited for it. But anyway, the female marrows are very pretty and very lovely to look at. Male marrows, on the other hand, are described as being less easy on the eyes. They're described as having green skin, being very scaly. Aloha! Hi, Reptile. And yes, I'm going to be using that voice for you. Once again, my speakers are acting up. I'm sorry about that. jeez. There we go. But yeah, male Meros, on the other hand, are a little less easy on the eyes, being green with scaly skin, sharp teeth, horns, and noses that are kind of slit and pig-like. Which, given the appearance, the male Meros being less easy on the eyes, this is often said to explain why Meros often go after humans as potential partners. Personally, I have always been of I prefer the insides rather than the outsides. The outsides are bonus, but that's just me. And another thing with mermaids is mermaids were often associated with vanity, as they were often depicted holding a comb and a mirror, or sometimes both. And churches often use the mermaid as a symbol to warn against vanity. And now, when I said before that mermaids nowadays are often depicted in a friendly, doe-eyed playmate sort of nature, it wasn't always like that. And I'm not kidding when I say that, because back then, in the Victorian time, but also further than that, mermaids were heavily associated with... Oof, you're buffering, Chief. Yeah, I know. And my speakers are being stupid. But mermaids, back in the Victorian times, and even further back then, were heavily associated with sexual power and female nature. And my screen has darkened. No, we're good. There we go. Okay, sorry, I unplugged my thing because it was on charge, and so there we go. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why it's buffering so much. I know the speakers act up, but yeah, anywho. So what I was saying before, mermaids were associated back in the day with feminine power and sexual and energy. I mean, back in the Victorian times, mermaids were depicted in very alluring and seductive ways. This, of course, being back in the time, Victorian period, where it was considered taboo or improper to depict a woman in an alluring position. Mermaids, fairies, and goddesses, usually Greek goddesses, were totally fine to draw in alluring and provocative ways. Because after all, these are women who lure men astray. And mermaids, for the longest time in art, were depicted as topless. They didn't wear seashell bras or any covering. Well, yeah, but if I had a choice between a mermaid and a dummy mummy, you're gonna take the arc. Mermaids could be very dominating. Like, again, not only did they go topless, but some sirens and other mermaids were often depicted as having two split tails, which easily gave sailors access to the treasure, if you know what I'm saying. So yeah, mermaids weren't always so innocent and sweet. They were provocative and alluring, and I mean, rightly so. These were women who were... I hate my speakers. These were women who were the classic femme fatale. They lured sailors away, trapping them with their songs. And it's over. Now, mermaids could be femme fatales, but there were also cases of mermaids being seen as benevolent and granting wishes, provided if you did something for them in return, like, free them from a net that they accidentally caught in. Or, give them offerings. There are plenty of water goddesses who take the form of a mermaid and are given offerings and such. Japanese mermaids, for example, are heavily associated with dragons and are also associated with giving wisdom to people. Because mermaids are everywhere. If you go to a country, chances are you'll find a mermaid. I guess in terms of merfolk, I prefer mer sharks, to be honest, but I would also love anglerfish mers, and that's another thing. merfolk, if you think about it, are extremely versatile and diverse. You can't have mer sharks. You can't have merfolk who live deeper in the water in the dark zone. I think that's what it's called. But yes, and another thing with mermaids is they could be femme fatales, but they could also be beneficial. And then they could also be their own worst enemy. They could, because mermaids eventually did become these wide-eyed and innocent maidens who fell in love with humans and wanted to show them the ocean below, but they ended up accidentally drowning their lovers because they forgot or they didn't know that humans can't breathe underwater. And this was one of the reasons why mermaids became the model, sort of, if you will, for tragic romances and unrequited love. After all, a human and a mer person can love one another, but where are they going to live? Nowadays, with modern writing and interspecies and, of course, modern technology and urban fantasy, a marriage between humans and merfolk can work out. And even back then the idea of mermaids and humans marrying wasn't anything new, but they often ended tragically. Usually with the human in question disobeying his wife's rules, like, you're not allowed to see me bathe on Sundays, or something of the like. In the case of the Selkies, it's stealing their coat. And it's when the Selkie finds her coat that she is drawn back in with her desire to be in the sea, that she returns to the sea, leaving her husband and her children. And another thing about Selkies that I forgot to mention, but Selkies are a case of merfolk being seen as benevolent, as they were believed to be symbols of good luck, and that if you saw Selkies in the water, that for fishermen, you'd be getting a good haul. Now, in gulper eel too! Need someone to clean out my fridge. You got a gulper eel. But yes, once again, Reptile proves the point that merfolk are extremely diverse, and you can have whatever kind of merfolk you like. If it can be in the water, then it's fair game. And this doesn't just limit yourself to the ocean. For people who are like, please, I like freshwater and rivers and lakes, mermaids can dwell there as well, even in swamps. It's possible. And sometimes it just takes a wee bit of imagination. Now, in this modern era that we live in, mermaids have been associated with movies and stories. Okay, but what Selkies count as merfolk or as beast folk? They're associated with mermaids. They're associated with mermaids, but then they are also associated with the animal bride and the animal bridegroom trope. Because again, it's an animal taking off their skin to have a beautiful human figure. I really, really hate my speakers. There we go. But yes, mermaids nowadays have been in many stories and film adaptations and TV series. And it's one such story adaptation that I'm going to be reading to you guys today. Another classic brought to us from Hans Christian Andersen himself. I'm going to be reading none other than The Little Mermaid. Now, The Little Mermaid is a classic, and almost everyone knows the story. Sorry. But, I mean, whether you've read an adaptation in a book, or you've seen a film adaptation, whether it be the Disney animated Little Mermaid, or Studio Ghibli's Ponyo, both of which are very good, and I actually do have them in my collection. Regardless, The Little Mermaid is a well-known fairy tale. Wheelchair girl. Oh my gosh. Hush, Reptile. We get it. But before anyone asks, no, I'm not going to be talking about the live-action Little Mermaid remake. We're not going to be talking about that because I don't consider that an adaptation. And if I talk about it, I'm going to get angry. And then I'm going to need to find a fork. And I'm going to need to find the nearest person to jab with said fork. So we're not going to talk about it. So, yeah. Anyway, The Little Mermaid is a classic unrequited love story and a tragic love story. To the point where in Monster Musume, it is referenced that merfolk love tragic romances, as The Little Mermaid is their icon for those tragic romances. And it is often said to be a love letter. Oh, thank gosh, not that abomination. Yes, Reptile, I know, we're not talking about that. Because I will get angry. Now, as I was saying, The Little Mermaid is the icon for tragic love stories. And some of you people even believe that it was a love letter from Hans Christian Andersen to another gentleman he liked. Which, back in the time, such a thing was taboo. Nowadays, it's accepted. You can be with whoever you want. I'm not going to judge you. I can't judge. Yeah, but... And if you think about it, it does make sense. Because, again, a mer person and a human can love each other, or a bird and a fish may love each other, but where are they going to live? As I said earlier, again, with urban fantasy, some imagination, and of course, modern day technology, a mer person and a human can live together. There are going to be hiccups, of course, and it's definitely a lot of effort on both ends, but it can be done. Now, I know what some of you were thinking. It's like, geez, it sounds like Avery likes mermaids or something. And to that, I will say, you know what? You're right. I love mermaids. My favorite movie, Disney movie, as a little girl growing up, was The Little Mermaid. In fact, I'm such an avid mermaid person that during my trip to the coast in Florence, I explored the shops and I actually did get some more mermaid things for my lair. I got a guide to mermaids. Who doesn't like mermaids? I know, right? Mermaids are wonderful. Got a guide. I got this beautiful journal, like this journal. Oh my gosh, it's gorgeous. It's a blank journal. I don't know what I'll fill it with, but yeah. Mermaid journal, mermaid guidebook, a survival guide for the landlocked mermaid, and an all about mermaid book. And yeah, I love mermaids. I've always enjoyed the sea, to the point where I want to live on the coast. If I could, I would live on the coast. But yeah, I love mermaids, and I'm not the only person who does. We as a race, we've always been fascinated with the unknown and with the ocean and things we can't generally understand. And even in one of my books that I got when I was off on an adventure, I got a book on the lore, the myths, and legends of mermaids. And yeah, we as a humanity, we're fascinated with merfolks. It's just a part of who we are. Now I have a book of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales, but it doesn't have The Little Mermaid. However, I have the world's best fairy tales. This is a Reader's Digest version that I found at a used bookstore, and it does have the story in it, along with a plethora of others. Now, I always go, whenever I read these stories, I always go after the original stories that inspired the Disney films. Because the original stories are very, very, very messed up. And The Little Mermaid is no exception. It is very messed up in its own right. And so I hope you guys are ready for that. Feel free to comment as I read. And without further ado, let's dive into it. Pun intended. Oh, it's my cat. His legs are brushing up against my laptop. I'm sorry. Well, I'm sorry. Your legs were scratching against my laptop. I'm sorry. You literally just giving me a dirty look. But yeah, let's dive into the story. The Little Mermaid. Far out at sea, the water is as blue as the bluest cornflower, and as clear as the clearest crystal, but it is very deep, deeper than any anchor cable can fathom. Many church steeples would have to be piled on top of the other to reach from the very bottom to the surface of the water, and down in the depths live the sea folk. Just in time. Hi, Matt Newcomb. Welcome. I just got started on The Little Mermaid. Now, don't imagine for a moment that there is nothing but bare white sand on the bed of the ocean. No, all the most fantastic trees and flowers grow there, and all kinds of fishes, big and small, flit in and out among the branches, just as birds do in the air. At the very lowest depth, at the very lowest depth, palace of the Sea King. The walls are made of coral, and the high pointed windows of the clearest amber, but the roof is made of mussel shells, which open and close with the gentle motion of the water. It is a wonderful sight for every one of which would be a oh. It is a wonderful sight, for every mussel shell contains gleaming pearls, and a single one of which would be a perfect ornament for a queen's crown. The Sea King had been a widower for many years, but his old mother kept house for him. She was very intelligent, although proud of her noble birth, and that is why she went about with 12 oysters on her tail, while the other high-born ladies were allowed to wear just 6. Apart from this, she deserved a great deal of praise, because she was so fond of her grandchildren, the princesses. They were 6 beautiful little girls. Oh, oops. Sorry. Okay. They were 6 beautiful little girls, but the youngest was the prettiest of them all. Her skin was as clear and delicate as a rose petal. Her eyes were as blue as the deepest sea. But, like the other mermaids, she had no feet, only a fish's tail. Almost missed this. Well, I'm glad you were able to come, Small Snacks. All day long they used to play down in the palace, in the great galleries where living flowers grew out of the walls. When the tall amber windows were opened, fishes swam in just as swallows fly into our rooms when we open the windows. But the fishes swam right up to the little princesses, ate from their hands, and allowed themselves to be patted. Outside the palace, there was a large garden with trees of fiery red and deep blue, their fruits glimmering like gold and flowers blazing like fire, ceaselessly moving their stems and leaves. The ground itself was of the finest sand, but blue as a sulphur flame. Down there, a strange blue mist enveloped everything. You would have thought you were standing high in the air, with only the sky above and beneath you, and not down in the depths of the ocean. When the surface was dead calm, you could just faintly perceive the sun, looking like a crimson flower from which streamed a flood of light. Each of the small princesses had her own little plot in the garden, where she could dig and plant as she liked. One of them gave her flower bed the shape of a whale. Another thought it nicer to have hers formed like a mermaid, but the youngest made hers as round as the sun, and used only flowers as red as the sun itself. She was a strange child, quiet and pensive. And while the other sisters decorated their gardens with all kinds of extraordinary things that they had taken from sunken ships, she would have nothing in hers but a beautiful statue and her red flowers. It was the statue of a handsome boy in the purest white marble that had sunk to the bottom of the sea after a shipwreck. Next to the statue, she planted a rose-red weeping willow, which grew splendidly and shaded the statue with its delicate branches. Nothing gave the youngest princess greater pleasure than to hear about the world of human beings up above. She made her grandmother tell all she knew about ships and towns, people and animals, but what fascinated her beyond words was that the flowers on the earth were scented, while those at the bottom of the sea were not. That the woods were green, and that the fishes one saw among the branches could sing so loudly and sweetly that it was a delight to hear them. Grandmother called the little birds of the air fishes, because otherwise the mermaids would not have understood her, for they had never seen a bird. As soon as you are 15, said their grandmother, You will all be allowed to rise up above the water and sit on the rock in the moonlight and watch the big ships sail by. The following year, the eldest sister was to have her 15th birthday, but as there was 1 year between each of them, the youngest still had 5 whole years to wait before her turn came to see what things are like on earth. And the very one who had the longest time to wait was the most curious of them all. Many a night she stood by the open window and looked up through the dark blue sea, where the fishes were lashing the water with fin and tails. She could just perceive the moon and the stars, though their light was very faint. But through the water they looked much bigger than they do to us, and if something like a black cloud passed over them, she knew that it was either a whale swimming above her or a ship with many people on board. They probably never dreamed what a lovely little mermaid was standing below, raising her white hands towards the keel of their ship. The eldest princess had now reached her 15th birthday and was allowed to rise above the surface. When she came back, she had hundreds of things to tell the others, but the most wonderful of all, she said, was to lie in the moonlight on a sandbank in the calm sea, gazing at the huge town close to shore, where the lights twinkled like hundreds of stars, and to listen to the music and the church bells and to the noise and stir of carriages and people. But just because she could not get there, that was the very thing the mermaid longed to do most of all. Oh, how eagerly the youngest sister listened, and whenever after this she stood at the open window in the evening, looking up through the deep blue sea, she thought of the great town with its noise and bustle, and seemed to hear the sound of church bells coming right down to her. The following year, the second sister was allowed to rise up through the waves. She reached the surface just at sunset, and that sight was the most magnificent she had ever seen. The heavens looked like liquid gold, she told them, and the clouds, well, she never tired of describing their beauty, all rosy red and violet. As they sailed over her, faster than the clouds, like a long white veil hung out towards the sky, a flock of wild swans flew away over the water beyond which the sun was setting. She swam towards the sun, but it sank, and it faded away from sea and cloud. The year after that, the third sister went up. She was the most daring of them. So she swam up a broad river, which flowed into the ocean. She saw beautiful green hills and vineyards. Palaces and farms were faintly visible among the splendid forests. In a tiny cove, she found a crowd of little human children, splashing about quite naked. She wanted to play with them, but she gave them a fright, and they ran away. Then came a little black animal. It was a dog. But she had never seen one before. It barked at her so furiously that she was frightened and took refuge in the open sea. But she could never forget the beautiful woods, the green hills, and the lovely children who could swim in the water, although they had no fishes' tails. The fourth sister was not so daring. She remained far out in the stormy ocean and told her sisters that staying there was the best part of her adventures. You could see for miles and miles around, and the sky above was like a great glass dome. She had seen ships, but only far, far away. They looked like seagulls. The amusing dolphins had turned somersaults, and the gigantic whales had spouted water through their nostrils, giving the effect of hundreds of fountains playing. Now it was the turn of the fifth sister. Her birthday happened to be in the winter, so she saw things which none of the others had seen when they first went up to the surface. The sea was quite green, and large icebergs were floating about. They looked like pearls, she said. They appeared in the most wonderful shapes and sparkled like diamonds. She sat down on one of the largest, and every ship gave it a wide berth when the sailors saw her sitting there with her long hair flowing in the wind. Late in the evening, the sky became overcast. Thunder crashed and lightning stabbed the sky, while the black waves lifted the huge icebergs high up on their crests. Sails were furled on all the ships. The sailors stood in fear and trembling, but she sat quietly on her floating iceberg, watching the blue lightning flash in zigzags down into the shining sea. The first time the sisters rose above the water, they were all delighted with the new and beautiful things they had seen. But as they were now grown up, and were allowed to go to the surface whenever they liked, They lost interest in it. They longed for their home, and after a month had gone by, each said that no place was more delightful than the bottom of the sea. Besides, one felt so comfortably at home there. Sorry, my nose is stuffed up. Alrighty. Many an evening the five sisters would appear on the surface arm to arm. They had beautiful voices, more beautiful than those of any human beings, and when storms threatened to wreck the ships, the mermaids would swim in front of them. They sang their most seductive songs of the wonders of the depths of the sea and tried to persuade the people not to be afraid of coming down to them. But the seafarers could not understand them. They thought it was the storm they heard. They ever see the promised splendor, for when the ship sank, they drowned, and never reached the palace of the Sea King alive. At night, when the sisters rose up through the water, the youngest remained behind, quite alone, gazing after them. She would have wept, but a mermaid has no tears, so she suffers all the more. Oh, if I were only 15, she said, I know I shall love the upper world. Hello, Michelle. Welcome. I'm currently reading The Little Mermaid, and her sisters have all seen the surface, but the Little Mermaid has not because she's not 15 yet. And it's when a mermaid is 15 that she's able to go up to the surface. At last, she too reached the age of 15. Well, now we are getting you off our hands, said her grandmother, the old Dowager Queen. Come here, let me dress you up like your sisters. And she put a wreath of white lilies on her head, and each petal was formed of half a pearl. Then the old queen made 8 large oysters, fastened themselves to the princess's tail, to show her high rank. Oh, how it hurts, said the little mermaid. Well, one must suffer to be beautiful, declared her grandmother. The youngest mermaid would gladly have shaken off all this finery and laid aside the heavy wreath. The red flowers in her garden suited her much better, but she did not dare to change. Goodbye, goodbye, she said, and she rose up through the high waters. Just finish test sooner, but finally get to a stream of yours. Well, hooray! Like the blue. Thank you. I always try and dress appropriately with the story that I read. I try to at least. So this was the best I could do. The sun had just set when her head appeared above the surface, but the clouds were still tinted with rose and gold, and in the pink-flushed sky the evening star twinkled bright and clear. Again, sorry, my nose is stuffed up. That just sounds cute. Well, thank you. Bright and clear. The air was mild and fresh, and the sea dead calm. She saw a big 3-masted ship with only a single sail set, for not a breath of wind stirred, and the sailors were sitting on the rigging. She heard music and singing on board the ship. And as the darkness was gathering, hundreds of colored lanterns were lighted. They looked like the flags of every nation waving in the air. The little mermaid swam right up to the porthole of the cabin, and every time the swell lifted her, she could see crowds of people in evening dress. But the handsomest of them all was a young prince with great coal-black eyes. He could hardly have been more than 16 years old. It was his birthday, and that was the reason for the party. The sailors danced on deck when the prince appeared among them. Hundreds of rockets shot up into the air, turning night to day and frightening the little mermaid so much that she had to dive under the water. Sorry, again, stupid nose stuffed up. But she soon ventured to put her head up again, and it looked as if all the stars were falling down to her from the sky. Never had she seen such a display. It was so light on board the ship that one could see every rope, to say nothing of the people. Oh, how handsome the young prince was, laughing and smiling while the music rang out in the beauty of the night. It got quite late, but the little mermaid could not turn her eyes away from the ship and the beautiful prince. The colors were put out. No more rockets shot up through the air. No more guns were fired. But deep down in the sea there was a dull humming and rumbling. The water lifted her up and down so that she could look into the cabin, but the ship started to move. Sail after sail opened to the wind. The waves grew mightier. Great clouds gathered, and lightning flashed along the horizon. Oh, there was a terrible weather ahead, so the sailors furled the sails. The great ship plowed on, pitching and tossing in the angry sea. Waves crashed like enormous black mountains, were threatening to crash down upon the mast, but the ship disappeared like a swan in the trough of the waves, and was lifted again the next moment on the top of their towering crests. I picked you over watching some other person's most recent video. Well, fireworks. Yes, fireworks. But I mean, it is fair. He is a prince, and princes deserve celebration on their birthday. To be fair, everyone deserves to be celebrated on their birthday. Alright, anyway. Where did I leave off? Okay. Crests. The ship creaked and groaned. The thick planks cracked under the blows of the waves. The mast broke in two like a reed, and the ship rolled over so far to one side that water rushed into the hold. Then the little mermaid saw that the people were in peril, while she herself had to beware of the beams and pieces of the wreckage which were floating about in the sea. At one moment it was pitch dark, and she could see nothing at all. Then there came a flash of lightning, which lit up everything on board. She looked particularly for the young prince when the ship split apart, for she saw him sink into the sea. Her first impulse was one of joy, because he was coming down to her. But then she remembered that human beings could not live under the water, and that he could not come alive down to her father's palace. No, die he must not. So she swam in along the drifting beams and planks, quite forgetting that they might crush her. She dived deep into the sea, rose high up again amongst the waves, and at last reached the young prince, who could hardly keep on swimming in the stormy ocean. His arms and legs were beginning to fail him. His beautiful eyes were closing. He would have died had not the mermaid been there. True. Indeed, true. Oh, Mom just opened the door so the other cats could get in. Anyway, let's see. Had the mermaid not been there, she held his head above the water and let the waves carry her with him wherever they pleased. At dawn, the storm was over. Not a trace of the ship was to be seen. Yeah, I'm reading a story. No, it's not about you. It's about mermaids. October just came in. Hi, I'm reading a story. Hush. Anyway. Storm was over. The sun rose red and shining out of the water, and seemed to bring life and color back into the prince's cheeks, but his eyes remained closed. The mermaid kissed his high, noble brow, and stroked back his wet hair. She thought he looked like the marble statue down in her little garden. She kissed him again and wished from the bottom of her heart that he might live. Hi. You enjoying the story? I'm reading The Little Mermaid. You're standing on my foot. Well, you are. Oh. Ah! Please, no. Don't do that. You're welcome to listen to the story, but please don't claw me. That he might live. In front of her she saw land with snow-capped mountains in the distance. Near the shoreline were glorious forests, and close by was a church, or a convent. She could not be certain just what it was. Lemon and orange trees grew in the garden, and outside the gate were tall palm trees. There the sea had formed a cove, where the fine white sand had been washed up. She swam towards it with the handsome prince, and laid him on the sand with his head turned to the warm rays of the sun. The bells rang out from the white building, and a group of young girls came through the garden. The little mermaid swam farther out and hid behind some large rocks, covering her hair and her breast with sea foam so that no one could catch sight of her face. Welcome to the stream, kitty. Yeah, she just left. She's hopped up on a box. Burlo's still here. He's just sleeping on my bed and you can't see him. He's sleeping. I don't know what he's dreaming about. Worship the cat hours. No, we're not worshiping the cat. I'm reading you guys a story. I'm reading you guys The Little Mermaid. My goodness. And then kept watch to see who would come to the rescue of the poor shipwrecked prince. It was not long before one of the young girls arrived. For a moment she seemed quite frightened, but she ran for help, and the mermaid saw the prince come too, and smile at those who stood around him. But he did not smile at her far out in the sea, for he did not know that she had saved him. She felt very sad, and when he was carried into the great building, she dived sorrowfully down into the depths of the water and returned to her father's palace. There her sisters asked what she had seen on her first visit to the surface, but she would tell them nothing. Now I can't stop thinking of T-Cat posing memes, lol. That's kind of weird, but okay. Many an evening and many a morning she rose up to the place where she had left the prince. She saw how the fruit in the garden ripened and was gathered, how the snow melted on the distant mountains, but she never saw the prince. So she would return home sadder than before. Her only consolation was to sit in her little garden and throw her arms around the beautiful marble statue which was so like him. She neglected her flowers, and they grew into a wilderness all over the paths, and wove their long stems and leaves in and out of the branches of the trees until the whole place was shrouded in darkness. When she could endure it no longer, she confided in one of her sisters. At once the others knew about it, but nobody else, except for a few more mermaids, who just told their most intimate friends. One of them knew who the prince was. She too had seen the party held in his honor, and heard where his kingdom lay. "Come, little sister," said the other princesses, and with their arms about each other's shoulders they rose up in a long line through the water opposite the place where they knew the prince's palace stood. Sorry, that was my brother, since my door is open. When the cats are in here, I'm shutting the door again so my brother's voice does not make any more appearance. Sorry about that. Off to my English classes, lol. Funny timing. Well, thank you for coming, Mitchell, and I'm glad you were able to come. I hope you have a good English class. Alice stood. It was built of a kind of pale yellow stone, with a great flight of marble steps leading down to the sea. Splendid gilded cupolas were seen above the roof, and in between the pillars surrounding the whole building stood marble statues, which looked as if they were alive. Through the clear glass windows one looked into magnificent halls, where costly silk curtains and tapestries were hung, and where all the walls were covered with large paintings. In the middle of the biggest hall a great fountain was playing, its jets soaring high up towards the glass dome through which the sun shone down upon the water, and upon the beautiful plants growing in the great basin. Now she knew where he lived, and many an evening and many a night she haunted the palace. She swam much closer to land than any of her sisters had dared to do, and she even went up the narrow creek running under the splendid balcony, which cast its long shadow upon the water. Here she would sit and gaze at the young prince, who thought he was quite alone in the bright moonlight. Often in the evening she saw him sailing to the sound of music in a splendid new ship with waving flags. She peeped through the reeds, and if the wind caught her long silver-white veil, those who saw it thought it was a swan spreading its wings. Many a night she heard the fishermen praising the young prince, and she rejoiced that she had saved his life. She thought how closely his head had rested on her bosom. For those who don't know, the bosom is the chest area. And how lovingly she had kissed him, though he knew nothing about it, and could not even dream of her. She became more and more fond of human beings, and more did she long to be among them. Their world seemed much larger than her own. They were able to fly over the sea in ships and climb the lofty mountains. The lands they possessed stretched farther than her eyes could reach. There was so much she wanted to know, but her sisters could not answer all her questions. So she asked her old grandmother, who knew so well that upper world, as she rightly called the countries above the sea. If human beings aren't drowned," asked the little mermaid, "can they live forever? Don't they die as we do, down here in the depths of the sea?" "Yes," answered the old lady. "They must die too, and their lifetime is even shorter than ours. We can live to be 300 years old, but when we cease to exist, we turn to foam on the water. And so we don't even have a grave down here among our dear ones. We have no immortal soul. We never have another life. We are just like the green reed. Once it is cut, it never grows again. Human beings, on the contrary, have a soul which lives forever, which lives after the body is turned to dust. It rises through the limpid air up to the shining stars. Just as we rise out of the water and see the countries of the earth, so do they rise up to the unknown beautiful regions which we shall never be able to see. Why were we not granted an immortal soul? Asked the little mermaid. I smell some foreshadowing. Funny that. Foreshadowing. Casually just sips my tea. Anyway, asked the little mermaid in a melancholy voice. I know that I would gladly give the 300 years I have to live if I could be a human being for only one single day and then have some part in that heavenly world. You must not brood over that, said her grandmother. We have a much happier life than the people up there. So I am fated to die and float like foam upon the sea? Can I do nothing to win an immortal soul? No. Casual tea breaks are encouraged. Yeah. And I only have so much left in that cup. No, answered the old lady. That could only happen if a human being held you so dear that you were more to him than father and mother. If he loved you with all his heart and soul, as if his right hand were joined to yours by a monk, and with the promise to be faithful to you here and in all eternity, then his soul would pass into your body, and you would have a share in the happiness of mankind. He would give you a soul, yet retain his own, but that can never happen. The very thing that is considered beautiful here in the sea, your fish's tail, is considered ugly on the earth. People have very poor judgment indeed. They have two clumsy supports which they call legs, and think them beautiful. Then the little mermaid sighed and looked sadly at her fish's tail. Come, let us be happy, said her grandmother. Let us leap and jump about during the 300 years we have to live. That seems a fair enough amount of time. After that, we can rest more merrily. Together, tonight we are giving a court ball. Truly, it was a magnificent affair, such as one never sees on earth. The walls and ceiling of the great ballroom were made of thick, transparent glass. In rows on each side stood several hundred gigantic shells, rose red and grass green. A blue fire was burning in each. They lit up the entire room, shining through the walls, lit up the sea as well. Innumerable fishes, great and small, could be seen swimming near the glass walls. Some had scales gleaming scarlet, while others shone like silver and gold. Down through the middle of the hall there flowed a broad stream on which the merman and mermaid danced to their own beautiful singing. No voices such as theirs are ever heard among people of the earth. The little mermaid sang more beautifully than anyone else. Everyone applauded her, and for a moment her heart was filled with joy, for she knew she had the loveliest voice of all, on the earth or in the sea. But she could not forget the handsome prince, nor her sorrow at not having an immortal soul. So she stole out of her father's palace, and, while everything within was joy and gaiety, sat sadly outside in her little garden. She heard. Sorry, I accidentally lost my place. Suddenly she heard bugles sounding down through the water, and she thought, he is sailing up there, he whom I love more than my father or my grandmother, he whom my thoughts are clinging, and in whose hand I would gladly place the happiness of my life. I would risk everything in my world to win him an immortal soul, while my sisters are dancing in my father's palace. I shall go to the old sea witch. She has always terrified me, but perhaps she can advise and help me. All right, here it goes. Here it comes. Sorry. Again, my nose is stuffed up. It's driving me nuts. So she left her garden and set out towards the roaring whirlpools, for beyond them lived the witch. The little mermaid had never been that way before. No flowers grew there. Only the bare gray sandy bottoms stretched out as far as the whirlpools, which swirled around like roaring mill wheels, sweeping everything within reach down into the fathomless sea. She had to pass right through those crushing, whirling waters to enter the territory of the sea witch. Then, for a long way, the only road went over a hot, bubbling morass, her peat bog. Oh no, not the sea witch! Yes, the sea witch. It's that time again. It's time for some more magic inside. She saved the prince, and now she wants to be with him. So yeah, it's time to see the sea witch. Because humans apparently do not like fishtails. Yes. Ask the sea witch for help. The name sea witch clearly doesn't give off red flags. I mean, just, wait and hear this. I know Ursula is the villain of the Little Mermaid, but, like, hear me out. Like, listen to the story. But, I mean, yeah. We had to get to this eventually, so. Her peat bog, as the witch called it. Behind it lay her house, in the midst of a strange-looking forest. All the trees and bushes were polyps, half animal and half plant. They looked like 100-headed snakes growing out of the ground. The branches were long, slimy arms with slithery, worm-like fingers, moving joint by joint from the root up to every tip. They twined around anything they could reach, never loosening their grip. Terror-stricken, the Little Mermaid stopped on the edge of this forest. Her heart beat faster with fear, and she almost turned back. But then the thought of the prince and of the human soul and her but then she thought of the prince and of the human soul, and her courage returned. Sorry, I gotta blow my nose real quick. Gotta handkerchief for ear. Sorry. It was driving me nuts, so sorry you had to see that. Alright, that's better. Okay, let's see. And her courage returned. And then the mermaid noped out of there so hard and kept her voice. The prince wasn't worth it. No, she thinks of the prince and of the human soul, and her courage returns, and so she keeps going. Sorry, Matt. Although that does provide an intriguing theory of what could have been. All right. She bound her long flowing hair tightly around her head so that the polyps might not seize her by it. She folded her arms closely across her breast and darted off as a fish darts through the water. And among the hideous polyps, which... Sorry about that. Sneezing fit. Sorry. Darted off. In among the hideous polyps which stretched out their supple arms and fingers to catch her, she saw how each of them clung tightly to something it had caught. People who had perished at sea and sunk deep down to the bottom were visible as white human bones among the arms of the polyps. The polyps also cut ship's rudders and sea chests and skeletons of land animals, and, most horrible of all, she even saw a little mermaid whom they had caught and strangled. Oh, the poor unfortunate souls. Nice reference, and yeah, I mean, people who drown, like, yeah, these polypy things. Of course, though, the community of bards, as I like to call them, people who would love to do some monster hugging, if you know what I mean. But yeah, monster people would probably be into these polypy arms, despite the strangling. But I mean, and again, with sea folk seeing fishtails as ugly, I can hear a bunch of bards and people who are into monster hugging being like, "Excuse me." Anyway, I digress. Hans Christian Andersen really enjoys publishing innocent people who only look for a little more in life. I suggest watching the Jules Depperman on hand. It's hilarious. I may have to. Thank you, Matt. I will definitely see about doing that. Alrighty. So polyps with skeletons, sea chests, and the body of a mermaid whom they caught. She came next to a great slimy clearing in the forest where big fat water snakes writhed and rolled, showing their ugly yellowish white bellies. In the center of the clearing was a house built of the bones of shipwrecked men. There sat the sea witch, letting a toad feed out of her mouth, exactly as we let a canary eat sugar. She called the hideous fat water snakes her little chickens, and let them creep and crawl over her great spongy bosom. Yeah. My nose is running again. I'm sorry. But yeah, charming place she lives in. Honestly, I think I kind of prefer the sort of skeleton, the sea beast skeleton from the original. But I mean, yeah. Oh, there we go. Once again, I'm terribly sorry about that. But it'll just drive me nuts if I don't take care of it. So. But yeah, we finally arrived at the sea witch's lair. The sea snakes her chickens and she lets them creep and crawl over her great spongy bosom. I mean, my cats have slept on my chest before, and there's a little bit of pressure, but I mean, I don't know about that. The creepy crawling over. Yee. That seems a little weird. Anyway, I know what you want, said the sea witch. It is very foolish of you, for it will bring trouble upon you, my pretty one. But all the same, you shall have your way. You want to get rid of your fish's tail, to have 2 bits of stumps to walk with instead, like the people of the earth, so that the young prince will fall in love with you, and you will win both him and an immortal soul. Here the witch let out a laugh so loud and so ghastly that the toads and snakes she had been fondling tumbled down to the ground, where they lay wallowing about. You have come just in time, said the witch. Had you waited until sunrise tomorrow, I could have not helped you for a whole year. I am going to brew a potion for you. Before the sun rises, you must land with it. Sit down on the shore and drink it. Then your tail will part in 2 and shrink to what people of the earth call pretty legs. But it will hurt as if a sharp sword were cutting through you. Everybody who sees you will say you are the prettiest human being they have ever seen. And you are to keep your gliding motion. No dancer will be able to move as gracefully as you. But at every step you will feel as if you were treading on a sharp-edged knife, so sharp that your feet will seem to be bleeding. How scandalous with the amount of bosom in this story! Oh, please. It's not that scandalous. All the Little Mermaid does is hold the prince's head close to her bosom, and then we got the snakes swimming around the bosom. Trust me, this is tame in comparison, Matt. Because in Victorian days, mermaids were often depicted as topless. So the bosoms were free. Anyway. Needed a break for tea. I'm running out of tea. Dang it. She paused for a moment and then went on. If you can bear all this, I shall be able to help you. I can, said the little mermaid in a quivering voice, and she thought of the prince and of winning an immortal soul. But remember, said the witch, once you have taken human shape, you can never become a mermaid again. You can never return to your father's palace, and if you do not win the love of the prince, so that for your sake he forgets father and mother, and clings to you with heart and soul, and lets the monk join your hands, making you man and wife, then you will not win an immortal soul. On the very morning after he has married someone else, your heart will break, and you will become foam on the sea. I am willing, said the little mermaid, who was as pale as death. But you will also have to pay me, said the witch, and it is not a trifle that I require. You have the most beautiful voice of anyone down here in the depths of the sea. You think that you will be able to charm the prince with it, but you must give that voice to me. I want the best thing you possess in exchange for my precious potion. I must drop some of my own blood into it so that the drop may be as sharp as a 2-edged sword. But if you take my voice, said the little mermaid, what else shall I have left? Your beautiful form, said the witch. Your gliding motion and your elegant eyes, they will be enough for you to beguile any human heart." "Well, well," she thought after a moment, "have you lost your courage? Put out your little tongue, and I will cut it out and take it as my payment, and you shall have the potent draught in return." "So be it," said the little mermaid, and the witch put her cauldron on the fire to brew the magic draught. "Cleanliness is a good thing," she said, and she scoured out the cauldron with the snakes that she had tied up into a knot. Then she made a cut on her finger and let her black blood drip into the cauldron. The witch kept on throwing in different ingredients. When the mixture finally started to bubble, it sounded like a crocodile sobbing. The steam coming from the cauldron shaped itself into the most terrifying and horrible forms. When at last the potion was ready, it looked as clear as the clearest water. Sorry, I gotta blow my nose again. Sorry about that. Alrighty. Clearest water. "There you are," said the witch, and she cut out the tongue of the little mermaid. Now she had become mute, and could neither sing nor speak. "If the polyps should clutch you when you are on your way back through my forest," said the witch, "just throw a single drop of this draught upon each of them, and their arms and fingers will scatter into 1,000 pieces." But there was no need for the little mermaid to do so. The polyps shrank back in terror when they saw the shining potion gleaming in her hand like a twinkling star. "Oh my goodness." Yep. Instead of just her voice, the sea witch cuts out her tongue. Which, I mean, is, necessary because without a tongue, we can't really speak. We can't form vowels and consonants. So it makes sense that she would cut out her tongue. But, I mean, it is fair, though. Yeah, she's got to make this... October, why you gotta wander around? But yeah, she's got to make this potion that's kind of important and expensive, so it's kind of pricey. You want this potion? Give me your tongue. That's a dumb tongue if you think about it. Anyway. But she's done it. There's no going back. Alrighty. Like a twinkling star, thus she passed quickly through the forest, the bog, and the roaring whirlpools. She could see her father's palace. The torches had been extinguished in the great ballroom. Her family were all probably asleep, but she had not the courage to approach them now that she was mute, and was leaving them forever. It seemed as if her heart was going to break with sorrow. She stole into the garden, picked one flower from each of her sister's flower beds, and blew 1,000 kisses towards her home, and rose up through the deep blue sea. It was not yet sunrise when she saw the prince's palace, and went up the stately marble steps. The moon was still shining beautifully clear. The little mermaid drank the sharp, burning draught given to her by the witch, and she felt as if a two-edged sword had cut through her delicate body. She swooned with agony and lay as if she were dead. When the sun spread its rays over the sea, she awoke and felt a stinging pain, but before her stood the handsome young prince. October, do you mind? I get that I still have gifts there from the coast. I'm well aware, but please, stop it. Here, just... Here we go. Sorry, she was crinkling a paper bag. A plastic bag was driving me nuts. Alright, just gonna go back from where I left off. When the sun spread its rays over the sea, she awoke and felt a stinging pain, but before her stood the handsome young prince. He fixed his coal-black eyes upon her, and under his gaze she lowered her eyes and saw that her fishtail had gone, and that she had the prettiest pair of white legs any young girl could desire. But her body was naked, so she veiled herself with her long, thick hair. The prince asked who she was and how she had come here, and she looked up at him with her dark blue eyes, so mild, and yet so full of sadness, for she could not speak. Then he took her by the hand and led her into the palace. As the witch foretold, she seemed at every step to be treading on sharp knives and pointed daggers, but she bore the pain gladly. Led by the prince, she moved as light as a bubble, and he and everyone else marveled at her graceful gliding motion. They clad her in costly robes of silk and muslin. She was the fairest of all in the palace, but she was mute, and could neither speak nor sing. Beautiful slave girls, dressed in silk and gold, came before them and sang for the prince and his royal parents. One of them sang more delightfully than any of the others, and the prince clapped his hands and smiled at her, which saddened Little Mermaid, for she knew that she herself used to sing far more beautifully, and she thought, "Oh, if he only knew that I gave away my voice forever in order to be with him." What are you going on about? What are you doing, October? Calm down. Calm down. Calm down. The slave girls now danced gracefully to the accompaniment of the loveliest music imaginable. Then the little mermaid lifted her pretty white arms and, rising on the tips of her toes, flitted across the floor, dancing as no one had ever danced before. With each of her movements, her beauty became more and more evident, and her eyes spoke more deeply to the heart than the song of the slave girls. Everyone was enchanted, especially the prince, who called her his own little foundling, and she danced again and again, though every time her foot touched the ground, it seemed to her as if she were treading on sharp knives. The prince had said she must always remain with him, and she was allowed to sleep on a velvet cushion outside his door. He had a page's dress made for her so that she might accompany him on horseback. They rode through the fragrant woods where the little green boughs brushed her shoulders and the little birds sang hidden among the leaves. She climbed the highest mountains in the kingdom with the prince, and though her delicate feet bled so that even the others in the group with them had noticed it, she only laughed and followed him until they could see the clouds moving far below them like flocks of birds on their way to distant lands. At night, when the others were asleep in the prince's palace, she would go out to the broad marble steps and cool her burning feet in the cold sea water, and then she would think of her dear ones in the depths of the sea. One night, her sisters appeared arm in arm, singing mournful songs as they swam along. She beckoned to them, and they recognized her and told her how much she had grieved them all. They visited the little mermaid every night after that, and once, in the far, far distance, she saw her old grandmother, who had not been above the water for many years, and the Sea King with his crown upon his head. They stretched out their hands towards her, but did not venture near the land as her dear sisters. Day by day she grew dearer to the prince. He loved her as one loves a good child, but had no thought of making her his queen. Yet his wife she must be, or she could never win an immortal soul, but would become merely a cloud of foam on the sea the morning after he wed another. "Am I not dearer to you than anyone else?" her eyes seemed to ask when he took her in his arms and kissed her fair brow. Surprised no comments are being made about the prince in this story as I'm reading it. Because, I mean, he literally has her sleep on a cushion. Ah! October! Stop that! She tugged at the back of my blouse, which is kind of frilly, so yeah. Sorry. But, geez, he literally has her sleep on a cushion outside his bedroom door. I'm surprised nobody's not making any comments about that. "Yes, you are the dearest of all to me," said the prince, "for you have the kindest heart of all. You are more devoted to me than anyone else, and you look like a young girl whom I once saw, but whom I shall probably never see again. I was on board a ship which was wrecked. The waves carried me ashore near a holy temple where a group of young maidens were serving. The youngest of them found me and saved my life. I saw her but twice. She is the only one in the world I could ever love. But you look so much like her that you almost take the place of her image in my heart. She belongs to the holy temple, and therefore destiny sent you to me. We will never part. Alas, he does not know that I saved his life, thought the little mermaid. It was I who carried him over the water to the forest where the temple stands. I stayed hidden in the foam to see if anyone would come. I saw the pretty maiden whom he loves better than me. And she gave a deep sigh, for as the mermaid had, she had no tears. The maiden belongs to the holy temple, he tells me. She will never come out into the world, so they will never meet again. I am with him. I see him every day. I will cherish him, love him, and give up my life to him. But soon it was rumored that the prince was going to marry the beautiful daughter of a neighboring king, and that was why he was fitting out such a splendid ship. They said that the prince was paying a state visit to the country of that king, but the real reason was to see the king's daughter. He was to have a great entourage with him. The little mermaid shook her head and laughed, for she knew the prince's thoughts far better than anyone else. I must go away, he said to her. I must go and see the beautiful princess. My parents insist upon it, but they will not compel me to bring her home as my bride. I cannot love her. She is not like the beautiful maiden in the temple, or as you are. If I had to choose a bride, I would sooner choose you, my dear mute foundling with the speaking eyes. And he kissed her red lips, played with her long hair, and laid his head on her heart, so that she dreamed of human happiness and an immortal soul. I hope you're not afraid of the sea, my poor mute child, he said. We stood on the splendid ship which was to carry them to the country of the neighboring king. Then he told her of storm and calm at sea, of strange fishes in the depths of the ocean, and what divers he had seen down there. And she smiled at his description, for she knew more than anyone else about the bottom of the sea. In the moonlit night, when they were all asleep except the helmsman at the wheel, she sat by the rail and gazing down at the water. She fancied she could see her father's palace. On the top stood her old grandmother with a silver crown on her head, gazing at the keel of the ship through the fast-flowing current. Then her sisters came above the water and looked at her with deep sorrow in their eyes and wrung their right hands. She beckoned to them, smiling, and tried to make them understand that she was well and happy. But when the cabin boy came toward her, her sisters dived down again. So he felt quite certain that the gleam of the white he had seen was nothing but foam. Next morning, the ship sailed into the harbor of the neighboring king's magnificent city. All the church's bells rang, and from the tall towers trumpets were blown, while the soldiers stood at attention with flying colors and glittering bayonets. Each day brought new festivity. Balls and parties were given all the time, but the princess had not yet arrived. People said she was being brought up in a holy temple, where she was learning every royal accomplishment. At last, she appeared on the scene. The little mermaid waited anxiously to see her beauty, and she had to admit that she had never seen a more graceful form. The princess's skin was fine and delicate, and behind the long dark eyelashes smiled a pair of dark blue eyes, full of devotion. "It is you! You saved me when I lay like a corpse on the shore," said the prince, and he clasped his blushing bride to be in his arms. "Oh, I am more than happy," he said to the little mermaid. "My dearest wish, the thing I have never dared to hope for, has been granted to me. You will rejoice in my happiness, for you are more devoted to me than anyone else." Then the little mermaid kissed his hand, and already her heart seemed to be breaking. The morning after his wedding would bring death to her and change her to foam on the sea. We're almost at the end. Sorry, my nose itches. This is it, guys. This is the climax of the story. We're almost done. Oh my goodness. Literally 3 pages left, but this is the climax, folks. Surprised everyone's gone quiet. All the church bells rang out. Heralds rode about on the streets and proclaimed the betrothal. On every altar, fragrant oil was burning in costly silver lamps. The priests swung their censers. The bride and the bridegroom joined hands and received the bishop's blessing. The little mermaid, clad all in silk and gold, was holding the bride's train, but her ears heard nothing of the festive music. Her eyes saw nothing of the holy ceremony. She thought of the last night she had to live, and of all she had lost in this world. What? What? Disney didn't want you to see? Oh, what Disney didn't want you to see? Yes, here we come. We're at the tragedy. But I mean, at least in the animated Disney version, the story was done well. It had a happy ending, but it was done well and it was told creatively, which is what I like. And of course, we all know where the live action remake's going. They don't need love. Anyway. Oh, she had lost in this world. That very evening, bride and bridegroom went on board the ship. Cannons were fired, banners fluttered in the wind, and in the middle of the ship a royal tent of gold and purple was set up, furnished with great sumptuous cushions on which the bridal couple were to sleep in the calm, cool night. The sails swelled out in the breeze, and the ship glided smoothly and without any perceptible motion over the limpid sea. When it grew dark, colored lanterns were lighted, and the sailors danced merry dances on the deck. The little mermaid could not help thinking of the first time she rose to the surface of the sea and saw a similar sight of splendor and joy. Light as a swallow in full flight, she joined in the dance, and to the sound of cheers and shouting, danced as she had never danced before. Her delicate feet seemed to be cut by sharp knives, but the anguish of her heart was so great that she did not feel the pain. She knew only that this was the last evening she was ever to see the prince, for whom she had forsaken her people and her home, and given up her beautiful voice to the sea witch, and had daily suffered untold agony while he remained unaware of it all. The gaiety and merriment lasted long past midnight, and the little mermaid laughed and danced like the others, but with the thought of death in her heart. The prince kissed his beautiful bride, and she played with his black hair, and arm in arm they went to rest in this splendid tent. And Bella's claws are scratching at the back of my laptop. It's annoying. A hushed silence fell upon the ship. Only the helmsman stood at the wheel. The little mermaid laid her white arms on the rail and gazed out towards the east, waiting to see the red tinge of the dawn. The first rays of the sun, she knew, would kill her. Then she saw her sisters rising out of the sea. They were pale like herself. Their long, beautiful hair no longer fluttered in the wind. It had all been cut off. We have given it to the witch so that she may give you help and save you from dying before dawn. She has given us a knife. Look, here it is. Do you see its sharp edge? Before the sun rises, plunge it into the prince's heart. And when his warm blood splashes over your feet, they will grow into a fish's tail, and you will become a mermaid again. You will be able to come down with us in the water and live your 300 years before you turn into dead sea salt foam. Make haste! Either he or you must die before the sun rises. Her old grandmother has been mourning till her white hair has fallen out as ours fell under the witch's scissors. Kill the prince and come back. Make haste! Do you see that red streak in the sky? In a few minutes the sun will rise, and you must die. Having said this, they uttered a strange, deep sigh and disappeared in the waves. The little mermaid drew back the black curtains of the tent and saw the beautiful bride sleeping with her head on the prince's breasts. She bent down and kissed him on his fair brow. Then she looked up at the sky, where the first faint flush of dawn became brighter and brighter. She looked at the sharp knife, and again fixed her eyes on the prince, who in his sleep was murmuring the name of his bride. She, and only she, was in his thoughts. The knife quivered in the mermaid's hands, but then she flung it far out into the waves. They gleamed red where it fell. It seemed as if drops of blood were bubbling through the water. Once more she looked with dimming eyes upon the prince. Then she threw herself from the ship into the water and felt her body dissolving into sea foam. The sun rose out of the sea. Its rays felt mild and warm upon the death-cold sea foam, and the little mermaid felt not the hand of death. She saw the bright sun, and above her floated hundreds of beautiful, ethereal beings, so transparent that through them she could see the white sails of the ship and the rosy clouds of the sky. Their voices were music, but so unearthly that no human ear could grasp it, just as no human eye could see their forms. Without wings, they floated by their own lightness in the air. The little mermaid saw that she, too, had a body like theirs, and that it was gradually freeing itself more and more from the foam. "Toward who am I floating?" she asked, and her voice sounded like that of the others, so ethereal that no earthly music could possibly render it. "To the daughters of the air," answered the others. "The mermaid has no immortal soul and can never gain one unless she wins the love of a human being. Her eternal life depends upon a power outside herself. The daughters of the air have no immortal souls either, but they can gain one by their good deeds. We fly to the hot countries where the torrid air of pestilence kills men. We bring cool breezes to them. We spread the fragrance of flowers through the air and send them solace and healing. When we have tried for 300 years to do all the good we can, we receive an immortal soul and share in the everlasting happiness of mankind. You, poor little mermaid, have tried with your whole heart to do the same, but by your sufferings and by your courage in enduring them, you have raised yourself into the world of the spirits of the air, and now you can gain an immortal soul by good deeds accomplished in the course of 300 years. We're almost done, just bear with me. The little mermaid raised her translucent arms towards God's sun, and for the first time she felt tears in her eyes. Noise and bustle had started again on the ship. She saw the prince and his beautiful wife searching for her. Then they gazed with sorrow in their hearts at the bubbling foam, as if they knew she had thrown herself into the waves. Invisible by now, the little mermaid kissed the bride on her forehead, smiled at the prince, and soared with the other children of the air towards the rose-colored clouds floating through space. "In this way, we shall float into the heavenly kingdom in 300 years. "We may even reach it sooner," whispered one of them. "Invisibly we float out into the houses of human beings, where there are children, and for every day on which we find a good child who brings joy to his parents and deserves their love, our time of probation is shortened by God. The child is unaware of it when we float into the room, and if we smile at him in our joy, 1 year is taken from the 300. But if we see a bad and naughty child, then we must weep tears of sorrow over him, and every tear adds 1 day to our time of probation." And that is the end of The Little Mermaid. It's a bittersweet ending, but sometimes you need a bittersweet ending. It's actually symbolic to life. Not everything is all beer and Skittles, as my dad likes to say. Sometimes terrible things happen, but I don't know. I think it's a good story, and in all honesty, I do like the Disney adaptation, and I absolutely love Ponyo by Studio Ghibli. And I like that with Ponyo, it doesn't focus on a romantic love. It's more both the end of the story and the mermaid. Well, not entirely. Now she's a daughter of the air, so technically it's not the end of her. But as I was saying before, what I love with Ponyo is that it's very innocent, it is very sweet, and it focuses on a childhood friendship and the love of friendship rather than a romantic love, which I think is very sweet and adorable, and I love the art style. But yeah, that was the story of The Little Mermaid. I hope you guys enjoyed it despite the hiccups and flaws that came with the reading, like my stuffy nose and October, who felt the need to tug at my shirt while I was reading. But I hope you guys enjoyed it, and honestly, for this series at least, I always try and find a moral. I always try to find a moral to the story. Hit my speakers. There we go. Would you stop? Would you stop? Hang on. October is under my bed. There we go. She was causing mischief. There. Be calm. Calm down. Your month is coming up. But yeah, I always try and find a moral in this series. And for The Little Mermaid, some could obviously say, okay, fine, I'm going to put you down. There. Now, I know some people could say the moral of The Little Mermaid is be content. Like, be satisfied with what you have. Because if the Little Mermaid had been satisfied with just seeing the humans and then just living with her family, she wouldn't have died. So I can understand that moral. But at the same time, nothing ventured, nothing gained, and she eventually is going to get herself an immortal soul. And she was also merciful. She could have killed the prince and turned back into a mermaid, but she didn't. She chose to be merciful and threw her life into the sea. She became a maiden of air, but now, because of her sacrifices and because of all the pain she's endured, she's going to gain an immortal soul. And October's now cuddling up with Brillo. It's very wholesome. Honestly, my take, if I had to choose a moral, from The Little Mermaid, I would definitely say. So, sorry, I'm trying to think of a good moral that, like, my 2 cents worth of the story, because I do feel for her being very curious and wanting to know more. However, it's also knowing the limit, because I don't know. The moral of The Little Mermaid is to stay away from sea witches and beware of the occult. Okay. While that is funny, Matt Newcomb, I do kind of agree. Yeah, definitely stay away from the occult. That's definitely what I've heard. I can read mythology and folklore, but I don't deal in tarot cards or magic or Ouija boards. Is there a supernatural realm? Of course there is. But just because it exists doesn't mean I need to go sticking my nose into that area. But definitely be content. But yeah, sorry. Okay. A genuine moral that I can see for The Little Mermaid is be content. However, pursue your curiosities within reason, always being mindful of the danger. And of course, being merciful. Being merciful is a good quality to have. Because again, she could have killed the prince. She had the knife. They were both asleep. She could, for that matter, if we wanted to get really twisted, she could have killed the prince and regained her mermaid tail and gone back to sea. However, if you wanted to get really dark, she could have easily killed the bride. After all, the prince says she looks so much like her. She could have killed the bride, gotten into her clothes, thrown the body to sea, and taken her place. That could have happened. But she was merciful, and she spared both of them. Which, yeah, don't be ashamed to be merciful, though at the same time be content with what you have. But also find fondness in life and enjoy the feelings you have through the journey of life. Even if the outcome is sour, hold on to the love in your heart you experienced. Exactly. That's what I was trying to say. Thank you, Matt, for translating. Like, I can be eloquent sometimes, but sometimes it's just like, Yeah, so terribly sorry about that. But yeah, that was The Little Mermaid, a classic that Disney gave us twice with Ponyo, and of course the animated Little Mermaid, and now that they're going to ruin with the live action remake. Because the Little Mermaid doesn't need love. Here's the thing, love has its place in the world like everything else. Besides, it wouldn't need to if it's like, oh, they don't want the princess to get with, they don't want the mermaid to be with the prince, then focus on a different love. There are multiple loves in the world. There's the love a parent has for a child, the love of friends, the love of siblings. Could have gone any other way. And yeah. So, any questions? Any thoughts? Actually, ironically enough, the fact that the sea maids smile upon children who are good for their parents, and the fact that they cry for naughty children, actually ties into the next episode of the Storyteller's Corner. I'll let you all take a guess at what I'm going to read next time on the Storyteller's Corner, but I will say this. If you thought that the Little Mermaid was messed up, my brother is playing. Oh, his timer went off. But yeah, it's kind of fitting that the maidens of the air smile upon good children and cry when naughty children are naughty, because it ties into the story that I'm going to read. Another lesson learned: anytime you play in seafoam, it's a mermaid corpse. Oh, hush. Oh, hush. But I mean, yeah. In that case, yeah. According to Hans Christian Andersen, seafoam is the body of a mermaid. A dead mermaid. Huh. But yeah, I won't spoil the next story on this series too much for you, but I will say this: if you thought the Little Mermaid was messed up, with the tongue being cut out, the walking on knives, and the prince not falling for the Little Mermaid and making her sleep on a cushion outside his bedroom door and treating her rather like a pet. If you think the Little Mermaid was messed up, then you haven't seen nothing yet. Because the next story I'm going to read to you is so much worse. And of course, I'm going to be reading some spooky stories for October. So spooky, scary stories, which that's going to be fun. And also, I looked at the poll. The book was about ready to fall off my bed. That would have been odd. But yeah, I checked the poll, and from what you guys said, the vote was unanimous. You guys want diversity on the Storyteller's Corner, so from time to time I'll start reading poems. And ironically enough, I happened to get a book of poems while I was on my trip to the coast. This is the Barefoot Book of Classic Poems. This one's even got a poem from J.R.R. Tolkien, who's one of my favorites. So, yeah. I really hope you guys enjoy this, but this will definitely be one of the books that I dive into for poems. And I actually have another poll that I'll be posting pretty soon. But, yeah. I think that just about wraps up this video. Thank you so much for coming to this live stream, and thank you for coming and let me read to you guys again. I really appreciate it. Your love, your comments, your supports, and your subscriptions. It all means the world to me, and I'm glad you guys enjoyed the story and enjoy the content that I make. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye. Oh my goodness.